The Bond Minicar was not just small, it was almost unbelievable. This was a British three-wheeler you could physically lift to turn around, a car where reverse could become an engineering trick and where post-war desperation created something strangely brilliant. Subscribe if you love classic car documentaries. Today, we are uncovering 7 surprising secrets about the Bond Minicar that even true enthusiasts might have missed. The car you could lift to reverse. One of the strangest features of the earliest Bond minicars was not what they had, but what they lacked: reverse gear. On the first Mark A models from 1949, the tiny Villiers two-stroke engine drove the single front wheel, but there was no ordinary way to back out of trouble. The solution was almost comically simple. Because the car was so light, the driver could step out, lift the rear end, and physically turn it around. In a narrow British street, this was not elegant, but it worked. That unusual detail made the Bond feel halfway between a motorcycle, a pram, and a real car. It captured the make-do spirit of post-war motoring better than almost anything else. A front wheel that turned like a shopping cart, unlike most cars of its era. The Bond Minicar did not rely on a conventional front axle to steer two wheels. Instead, its single front wheel carried the engine and drive system, creating a compact mechanical nose that could pivot through an extraordinary angle. On later models, such as the Mark C, this gave the car a turning circle that felt almost absurdly tight. It was a surprisingly practical solution to a very real problem. How do you make a tiny three-wheeler usable in cramped towns without adding complexity or weight? The answer was to let the front end behave almost like a powered caster wheel. It looked odd, but in the lanes and courtyards of Britain, it gave the Bond a hidden advantage. Reverse by starting the engine backwards. When Bond eventually offered a proper reversing solution, it did not arrive in the way most drivers would expect. On certain later minicars, the reverse function could be achieved by restarting the two-stroke engine in the opposite direction. Instead of adding a heavy conventional reverse gear, the system used the nature of the engine itself as a part of the trick. To modern ears, that sounds almost impossible, but for a simple two-stroke, it was clever and compact. The practical benefit was obvious. The driver no longer had to wrestle the car around by hand, yet the emotional appeal is even stronger. It feels like engineering from another world, where limitations did not stop innovation, they created it. Born from aircraft thinking, not car thinking. The Bond Minicar was not simply a cheap little car designed by accountants. Its creator, Laurie Bond, brought with him ideas shaped by wartime aircraft engineering. And that background can be felt in the early car's lightweight construction. The body used aluminium and a stressed skin approach, more like aviation logic than traditional small car thinking. The result was a vehicle that stayed extremely light, helping a modest Villiers motorcycle engine move it with usable efficiency. This clever design was not about luxury or power, it was about doing more with less. In post-war Britain, where materials, money, and fuel all mattered, that philosophy gave the Bond its character. It was not crude by accident, it was minimal by design. Britain's tiny post-war freedom machine. To understand the Bond Minicar, you have to picture Britain in the late 1940s, still recovering from war, rationing, and financial pressure. For many people, a full-sized car was simply out of reach. But the dream of personal mobility had not disappeared. The Bond offered a compact, fuel-conscious alternative that could be driven under motorcycle-style licensing rules, making it feel more attainable than a normal motorcar. It was not glamorous, and it was never pretending to be a Jaguar or Bentley. Its magic was different. It gave ordinary drivers a roof, a seat, and a sense of independence. That is why the car matters emotionally. It turned 3 tiny wheels and a small engine into a symbol of freedom. The van nobody wanted to date in. One of the most human stories in the Bond Minicar family came from its commercial versions, especially the small van-style variants aimed at tradesmen. In theory, removing passenger space to improve load capacity made perfect sense. A plumber, shopkeeper, or repairman could use a tiny, economical vehicle for work without paying for a full van. But real life is rarely that tidy. Some versions were simply too practical for their own good, because a vehicle used for work during the day often became personal transport at night. If there was no proper passenger seat, the little Bond suddenly became less useful for weekends, evenings, and social life. It is a brilliant reminder that practicality is not just about cargo, it is about people. From barebones oddity to Anglia-style mini saloon, by the time the Bond Minicar reached its later Mark G form in the 1960s, it had changed dramatically from the bare, almost motorcycle-like Mark A of 1949. It gained more car-like details, including proper doors, wind-up windows, improved seating, and a more substantial saloon shape. The styling even moved with the times, borrowing the mood of contemporary British small cars with a rear window treatment that echoed the fashionable reverse rake look associated with the Ford Anglia era. These changes made the Bond more comfortable and more respectable without fully hiding its three-wheeled roots. That tension is what makes it fascinating. It began as a minimalist mobility machine, but ended as a tiny car trying hard to grow up. The Bond Minicar was more than a quirky three-wheeler. It was a clever, imperfect, and deeply human answer to a difficult moment in British motoring history. From hand-lifted reversing to aircraft-inspired construction, it proved that tiny cars can carry enormous stories. Click to watch more videos about fascinating classic British cars. Like, subscribe, and comment with your thoughts on the Bond Minicar. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next video.